Hi everybody, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. I hope that you're not all here because you've all got sleep problems and you're all exhausted and I'm going to be seeing people falling asleep. Hopefully, if that is the case, then you'll be getting some good tips this evening. I'm going to just start by asking you, if I can, hold that thought. So this is the intro. Right, if you wouldn't mind, if you can get online, don't worry if you can't, but if you can just open menti.com. I understand that it's open Wi-Fi. So if you go into menti.com, that's menti.com, and there you will be asked to put in a code. And the code is 29000435. And up will come some options that I want you to just take a moment to think about. Is what words come to mind when you think about sleep? About your sleep or about sleep generally. You can put in 1 word, 2 word, 3 words, whichever. And just have a moment. Is it working? Hopefully it's working. And we'll start to see some words coming up. Just to have a think about what comes to mind for you guys. We've got dreams, recovery, healing, relax, rest, peace. That's nice, I like that. Okay, I don't think any more are coming up, so I'm going to move on. But just wanted you to just have a moment to think, because when we think about our sleep, we don't often just step back a little bit and contemplate how we perceive our sleep. So just wanted to give you that moment to do that. And let's move on. So just a little intro about me. I am a mum of 3 teenagers, which really often test my patience and my resilience on the daily. I have my own history with sleep. I suffered with chronic fatigue as a young adult, which really impacted a huge part of every part of my life actually at the time. And at the time there was very little information and support available. So I really struggled. And then moving on a few years, I had some non-sleeping babies. I had an illness and menopause, and all of that gave my sleep quite the battering. So I really developed a very keen interest, some would call it obsession, about sleep. So I trained to become initially certified as a child sleep consultant, and I worked for many years helping families with their children's sleep. And then later on, I trained again to become certified as an adult sleep consultant. I also did added training through the NHS in CBT for insomnia, CBTI. So my main focus is on adolescent and adults with chronic sleep problems. I founded the sleep consultancy called The Sleep Works. And just for the record, I've just written there, I'm not a perfect sleeper, and people often say, well, surely you just sleep perfectly and your children do every night. And that isn't the case, but we'll talk about that. So just to give you a brief overview of what we'll be covering in the session, I want to talk a little bit about how your sleep works, what actually happens when you sleep, a little bit of the science. I won't be too scientific, but we'll go into a little bit of the science behind what actually happens when you sleep. We'll talk about what I refer to as the 8-hour myth, and I won't give it away, but we'll talk about that. I want to cover a little bit about the factors that influence our sleep, and what we do, some of the steps that we do in our day that impact on our sleep as well. And then I'm going to open what I call the toolkit of sleep stress. So some techniques that can help you manage stress around sleep. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody. There will be time for questions at the very end of the session. So let's start with talking a little bit about our sleep cycle. I find that sleep can be a little bit of a daunting prospect, and especially for people that struggle or feel sensitive around their sleep. This whole sort of idea, it's quite daunting, and I find it's really, really helpful to understand a little bit of the workings of what actually happens when we go to sleep. So let me just talk you through it. We start off, oops, there I go. Sorry, it's a little bit clunky. I'll get there eventually. So we start off in stage 1 of sleep. This is a light stage of sleep, and this is where you can be woken quite easily. So if there's any kind of background noise from the house, from the street, you can be woken quite easily from this stage of sleep. But slowly we start to sink into a slightly deeper stage. So the eye movement starts to slow down, our brain waves, our breathing starts to slow as we start entering into the sleep cycle. We then move on to the second stage, stage 2, and this is where the light sleep starts to develop into the slightly deeper sleep. So our brain is still very much active and we maintain an awareness of our environment, but our breathing, our heart rate lowers again. And this is a very important stage where our body makes repairs, very important repairs it needs to make, keeps our immune system strong, keeps us healthy. And it's often from this stage where we find it quite difficult to wake up from. So if you find that your alarm goes off and you're really struggling to pull into a wakeful state, it's potentially because you're in that next stage of the deeper sleep. So we move on. This is stage 3. This is deep sleep. We call this non-REM. REM stands for rapid eye movement. So as the name suggests, non-REM means that we have our eye movement is completely still. We have no muscle activity. Our body temperature drops to the lowest point it's going to be through the sleep cycle. So we're in that deepest stage of sleep that we're going to be in within our sleep cycle. And then we come back out into the final stage of our cycle. We call this REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And again, this is when our eye movement increases, our body temperature rises, our brain becomes more active again. And this is very often when our dreams happen in this final stage of the sleep cycle. So if you find that you often remember your dreams, it's because it's happening in that final stage of the sleep cycle before you start again back into the next sleep cycle. So there's 2 things I just want to flag up in particular here. One is we transition through these sleep cycles throughout the night. And what happens when we transition between sleep cycles, we have what we call a partial awakening, where you might be aware of it or you might not. You might be aware of it in that you might change position or pull a duvet over yourself, and then hopefully you're able to settle back into your next sleep cycle. And sometimes that partial awakening becomes a full awakening for whatever reason that may be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's important to remember that we do have these awakenings through the night. We evolved from a time back in the day when we needed to have those awakenings to check for predators and keep us safe. So we do still have that. That is the science of it. So when you consider, oh yes, I was awake, I was aware that I was awake during the night, you will be. That is the science of it. So it's important to remember that. Also, what I think is important to take note is that we tend to have our majority of our deep stage of sleep at the beginning part of the night. So from when we go to bed until middle of the night, we've completed most of the deep sleep we're going to have, and we spend less time in deep sleep and more time in the lighter stages of sleep as we progress towards early morning. So if you have a situation that isn't uncommon at all, where you find that you sleep relatively well for the first part of the night, and then you find yourself awake at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and you find that you're not able to get back into what feels like a deep sleep. Again, that is the science of it. So I think it's just really important and helpful to remember that. So moving on, I just want to touch very briefly on this is jumping, sorry, excuse the... Yeah, I want to just talk a little bit about the importance of sleep. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just wanted to flag up a few things. Is the impact, first of all, on our mental health. We know that when we haven't had enough sleep, we tend to be more moody, more frustrated, more irritated, and also we potentially feel more stressed and anxious. And there's a very strong connection, we call it a bidirectional relationship between sleep, anxiety, and sleep, in that the more stressed and anxious we feel, the more that is potentially going to impact on our sleep. And consequently, the more sleep deprived we become, the more that increases our stress and anxiety levels. So there's very strong connections here between the two. Also, our problem-solving skills, our memory gets consolidated in one of the stages of sleep that I mentioned before. And that's where our short-term memories shift into our long-term memory bank. So if we aren't getting enough sleep, then that's going to compromise that somewhat. And the impact on our physical health. So here we have our immune system I mentioned before. our blood pressure, our ability to be able to maintain a healthy blood pressure, our heart health, and also weight gain. There's the simple fact that if we're too tired, we're less inclined to keep moving and keep exercising, but also impacts on our hormone that relates to our appetite, and how hungry we feel can often lead to what we generally call comfort eating as well. So there's obviously huge impacts here on not getting enough sleep. So moving on, I want to talk now about the 8-hour myth, and I'm going to ask you to, with a show of hands here, is how many of you would say that you would need around 9 hours of sleep a night to be able to function pretty well? Okay, so there's a few of you. How about 8? 8, yeah, there's quite a few. 7, a lot of 7s. 6. Few 6s. I'm going to say 5, but I don't even want to look. 5. Okay, so that's really interesting. And what we've seen here is we've got a range. Okay, there's a range. Some of you say that you're fine on 6, and some of you need 8 to 9. And this is where I want to mention about the 8-hour myth. We are informed through everywhere, all the channels, social media, newspaper articles, screaming headlines that say, have you had your 8 hours of sleep? This what we perceive as the perfect night's sleep. And this can be very problematic, and especially for people that really do feel sensitive around their sleep, is this assumption that they need to have this magic number of 8 hours of sleep. And what we've just shown here is that isn't the case at all. And it isn't a one size fits all. It's almost like saying that everybody should wear size 7 shoes, or everyone should be 5'6". There is not a one size fits all when it comes to sleep, and everybody has their own individual sleep needs, and it's really important to remember that. So when we get asked as a sleep consultant that question of, well, how much sleep do I need? It's a very simplistic reply, but it does answer the question. And it's, you're getting enough sleep when you have enough energy to do what you need and want for most of the day on most days. Now, I know that does sound simplistic, but it really does answer that question. The first thing we ask is, how do you manage your day? Are you forced to put your head down and take a nap at your desk, or can you manage your day pretty well? That doesn't mean that you have to be bouncing off the walls with overloaded energy, but certainly that you are productive enough to manage what you need to do in your day. And if that's on 6 hours, that's your sleep need. And if that's on 8 hours, that's on your sleep need. I think it's really, really helpful to remember that we need to move away from this assumption of the perfect night's sleep. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about the factors that impact on our sleep. So we've got a few, some of them you will recognize and some of them maybe less so. So the first one is sleep drive. This is basically our appetite for sleep. We call it our homeostatic sleep drive. And this starts building from when we wake up in the morning, and it builds much like the steam in a pressure cooker. It starts building and building throughout the day until we get to bedtime when it's at its peak. And then when we go to sleep, that is the drive that helps us fall asleep. And then through the course of the night, it releases like the steam, and then it starts again the next day. So this is a really big factor that influences our sleep. And so many people it's sort of natural, I suppose, that if we find that we're very tired and we say, oh, I'm just going to go and have an early night tonight to try and catch up on sleep. This can be a big indicator that, and you find yourself, you go to bed early, you're not able to get to sleep, so you toss and turn, then this is obviously a factor because your sleep drive isn't at the peak. It isn't at the highest point it needs to be in order to be able to facilitate sleep at that point. So that's very significant, is not going to bed too early to make sure that your sleep drive is at the highest point it needs to be. The next one is our circadian rhythm. This is our 24-hour internal body clock, and it regulates our sleep-wake cycles, and it's based on environmental cues like light and dark, and also timings as well. So it signals to us when we need to go to sleep and when we need to wake up, amongst other things. So one of the things to remember here is that if we have very fluctuating wake-up times, for instance, then what we're doing is we're playing around a little bit with our circadian rhythm and possibly sort of being in a constant state of what feels like jet lag, really, because we're not regulating our body clock. Our body clock is not regulating, so we're almost fighting against our natural rhythms rather than working with. So that's a very important factor as well, is that we really try and work with our natural circadian rhythm. Our chronotype. So a chronotype is, are we morning larks? Are we night owls? And I'm going to do another show of hands here. Is morning larks. Who prefers to wake up early in the morning and go to bed on the earlier side? There's quite a few. How about night owls? Night owls. So we each have a chronotype. And this can be problematic, because if we are night owls and yet we still need to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning for work, then we're looking at some sleep loss there, because that is just the nature of it. So it is worth looking and seeing how we can play around with that. I often get asked, can I change my chronotype? Can I turn from a night owl into a morning lark? I mean, yes, to a degree. Night owls generally aren't going to be waking up full of the joys in the early morning, and I know this myself because I'm a night owl. But yes, there are steps that you can do, and you can do it gradually and slowly. But ultimately, that is your chronotype, and if you prefer being up later and getting up later, that is ultimately what you're going to stick with. The next one, and we're not going to have a sleep talk without mentioning screens, obviously. We know, you all know, the impact of screens on our sleep. So ultimately, the blue light that is emitted from these screens is, first of all, can impact on the production of melatonin, our sleep hormone. So if we're lying in bed facing a screen and then we switch it off and expect that our melatonin is going to be at the highest level to facilitate sleep, you might be mistaken. So obviously that's a big factor. And that is why the advice is there to really try and have some downtime away from the screens, at least an hour, if not more, before bed. Not always possible, but it's certainly worth, well, it had to have a mention in a sleep talk. The next are hormones, and I mentioned before about melatonin. That's our naturally occurring sleep hormone. And that starts getting produced when it starts getting dark. And consequently, our cortisol, which is our hormone that helps us stay awake, we want that to be produced in abundance in the morning. We want to dim down, excuse the pun, the production of melatonin when we wake up in the morning, and we want the cortisol to be able to get produced in abundance. So the key tip here would be that we wind down in order to be able, in a dimmer environment, in order to be able to facilitate the production of melatonin in the evening. And also, if we can, to try and have some natural light in the morning that helps to switch off the melatonin that might be still whirling a little bit around in your system, but also to give ourselves that cortisol boost in the morning, wherever possible. If you can't go out and go for a lovely walk in the morning and you don't have that luxury, at least open the curtains, switching on lights, having some access to light in the morning. And finally, stress. Our stress activates our body's fight or flight responses, and it really is what makes it often much harder to relax and to be able to fall asleep as well. I'm going to leave that section for when Ravi does his bit, because he's going to be able to help with that more. But that's obviously a key factor when it comes to sleep, is raised stress levels, certainly in the evening when we're trying to wind down and relax a little bit. So moving on, I want to just talk now a little bit about the factors of our day, and there are many more, but I just had to choose a few. I very much believe that achieving good sleep doesn't happen from as soon as you put your head on the pillow in the evening. It actually starts with when you wake up in the morning, and the steps that you go through in your day, your habits, your routines, your mindset, that very much determine how your night's sleep is going to go. So a few things I wanted to flag up. One is the morning habits. What do we do in the morning? And I'm not going to do a show of hands, because I would imagine, I know the result is, how many of you, the first thing you do when you open your eyes is look at your phone? I would say a fair few. So that's one thing, is jumping straight into your day. Also, rather than easing into the day, you're jumping straight in. Your mind is activating a second. As soon as you're facing that phone, your mind switches on, your brain is on, and you are full on into your day. So morning habits are really, really important to try and move into your day more gradually. Next is food. So our blood sugar level obviously drops significantly over the course of the night. And the clue is in the name, breaking our fast. If you find that you are groggy throughout the day, then partly we may be looking at a blood sugar level dips. And while often it's now become so popular, the intermittent fasting, and I'm not dissing it, I'm sure for some people it works well, but for others who do struggle with feeling groggy and lethargic during their day and a lack of focus, then making sure that you are maintaining blood sugar level throughout the day is really important. So having breakfast in the morning soon after you wake, regular meal times, snacking in between to maintain your blood sugar level rather than playing catch up with your blood sugar level. Caffeine, again, another must mention in a sleep session. We know the impact of caffeine. What I did want to just flag up in particular is how long caffeine actually stays in our system. It's got a half-life of up to 6 hours, which is a really long time. So if you think that dip that you might experience in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock, where we have that natural dip in energy and focus, and you may find that you're reaching for the caffeine at that point, and you're struggling then that evening to get to sleep, or you're waking up during the night, that might be a contributing factor. And I also want to mention that when I talk about caffeine, it's not just the coffee, there's a fair amount of caffeine in tea, in green tea, in fizzy drinks, and also in some over-the-counter medication as well. So I just wanted to mention that and flag that up. Movement, making sure that we're keeping moving in our day. It's very easy, especially when we're tired, is to reduce how much we actually keep moving. So making sure that we're keeping moving during our day. With hybrid working, a lot of the boundaries have been blurred a little bit between work and home. So making sure that you have that clear boundary between when the end of work is and when you are in your home environment. And wind down. And I wanted to just mention wind down in particular because we talk about it for kids all the time, the importance of a bedtime routine. But we as adults, we actually often don't give ourselves permission to do that, to have that wind down time. Like I mentioned about easing into our day, similarly, easing into our night. So we keep going and going and going. We get into bed and we just assume that we're going to be able to fall straight asleep without that wind down. So it's really important as well. So just very quickly, just flicking through what I call the sleep stress toolkit. You see that visual there of somebody lying there with gritted teeth saying, I am determined to go to sleep. This so often is the problem for so many people, is this desperation of needing to sleep, and also probably doing that mental calculation of if I go to sleep right now, then I will get X number of hours sleep. Sleep doesn't do well under pressure, and the more pressure we put on it, the more that is likely going to exacerbate our sleep problem. So it's really important to try and take the stress levels off a little bit. So incorporating, one of the things that I really strongly recommend, and it does sound simplistic, but you would be amazed at how effective it can be, is step out of your day for about 15-20 minutes. I'm sure there's nobody here that wouldn't say they have 15 minutes that they can take out of their day. And just step back out of the day, away from the screens, away from the news, away from the work, away from everything. And what you do within that 15 minutes, whatever helps you feel relaxed, whether it's some breathing, whether it's going for a quick walk, whether it's listening to a podcast, music, whatever it is. But this is a really helpful way of relieving the buildup of mental pressure that we build up during the day that often we take with us into bed. So that's the first one. The second one is a put the day to bed diary. This is a way of processing our day. Rather than lying in bed and processing the day, which is so often what we do, we lie there and all the thoughts are whirling, I didn't do this, I didn't finish this, I had words with this, is actually spending a little bit of time in the evening doing that on paper, not on your phone, not on a laptop, writing it down. We process it very differently when we write things down and we see it visually in front of us. 3 things I would include there. One is do a quick mind scan and think what went well in your day. What positives can you take from your day? It doesn't have to be earth-shattering stuff. It could be a nice lunch or a nice chat with somebody. But just take 3 5 minutes. The next section would be what didn't go so well, what was irritating, what caused you frustration in your day. And the final section would be a to-do list, a comprehensive to-do list, what you need to get done, work-wise, home-wise, family, at the end of the next day, week, month, just whatever it is, an absolute mind dump, put it down there. So while you might not have actually done these things, this can be really empowering. It can make you feel like, first of all, it can take it out of the constant whirling of your mind, which will leave you a little bit more space to relax when you get into bed. But it's just a way of processing it a little bit better outside of, it's sort of moving it away from sleep, this whole process. Relaxation, I mentioned the wind down. I'm going to not touch on breathing at all because we've got a pro in the room. So there is obviously a huge connection between breathing techniques and relaxation techniques and sleep. But the final one that I do want to mention is a sleep reset. We feel often if we're tossing and turning, and maybe that's at bedtime or maybe it's the middle of the night or early morning, that we've just got to lie there. We've got to stay there until we get back to sleep. And this very often, usually, is going to be contributing to your wakeful state, and it's also going to be contributing to your increased stress levels about the fact that you're not sleeping. So in a way, that's actually the worst thing you can do. What you really want to do, and this is, I want to differentiate between lying in bed and feeling quite relaxed and feeling drowsy that you might be falling asleep soon, as opposed to feeling pretty much awake that sleep is a way off. Then I want you to get out of bed and I want you to move to a different space. And this is a space that you've pre-set up. I like to think of it as a nest, a place that you have set up, a comfortable place to sit, dim lighting, something to listen to or to read. And you go to this space when you are feeling wide awake and feeling stressed. And until you start feeling sleepy, whether it's you start yawning or your eyes start getting heavy, then you go back into bed. And usually you're able to fall asleep more easily at that point. This process is very important in that, first of all, it helps you take your stress levels down about the fact that you're not sleeping. You're filling that time with something that helps you feel relaxed and de-stresses you somewhat. But also, you are moving your association. You're building up an association. When you're tossing and turning in bed, you're building up an association of this space as a place that you don't sleep well in. Even if it's subconscious, it's still an association that you've got. So almost getting into bed thinking subconsciously, this is the place that I toss and turn in. So with moving out of that space, when you're feeling that stress or feeling wide awake, you are moving away from that association and you are then creating a new association of your bed environment as the place that you do feel relaxed in and you do sleep in. So that, in a nutshell, is my sleep stress toolkit. Hopefully there's some bits in there that you will have gleaned and been able to start with even tonight.